everyone replied back saying, yeah, and they give a 50 to a dedicated volunteer who actually does activism.
Right.
But they, it wasn't. But I think it's really important to note that you want to reach people where they are, and it's about multiple channels. The other challenge, though, is that Obama, what he did when he was a candidate, he made promises about, I will use technology to open government. And no candidate in the U.S., except for Duvall in Massachusetts and a couple other small examples, had ever made a promise that they would actually use social media when the campaign was over. So I never had a market in the U.S. I had to speak in other countries, right? Because no one in the U.S. was interested.
Stephen was always going somewhere else.
The day after the election was over, everything turns off. And so like, if I were a candidate for governor, or if I was working on a campaign, I would try to get them to make promises about when the election's over, we'll keep using this technology. Cuomo's promising open New York, but I haven't heard much from other states, maybe Rhode Island as well. But to me, like, if I were a journalist, if I was on Twitter right now, I'd be saying, okay, what are the promises? Will all this stuff turn off the day the election's over? And even though we'd like the email to stop, we'd like to see something that actually follows through. And it's because in general, it's just been disappointing to see the lack of listening by government once the power is had.
I think, we can't forget about email, right? Email is very important. I think particularly generationally, the topic here was social networking, but in terms of Web 2.0 and these kinds of things, email is kind of the old standby. I think, well, a lot is talked about in the 2008 campaign about Obama and how they use social networking. Don't forget the forward about the lapel pin about Obama. How many of your parents and people talked about, Obama isn't patriotic, he didn't stand up for or the polls about 18% of people thinking Obama's a Muslim. Where does this stuff come from? It comes from people forwarding around emails, and there's been a couple drops about it on Fox News and whatnot, but really it's those emails that spread those urban legends. So, you can't underestimate the power of email. There are a couple tools that I use. For one thing would be to schedule out emails, to put a calendar on the wall and say, we're going to do something on Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. There's different techniques to do things. People like to email at 4:30 in the afternoon, hoping that people at work are down to 0, so then they get one,
10 a.m. Tuesday, that's the best time.
Okay.
10 a.m. Tuesday.
But there's a lot of, if you use a good email program, there's a lot of testing involved, like A/B testing. You just do a short little focus group to 10 people with this subject line and 10 people with this, and then an hour later you see who opened more, and then you do the rest of the people with the better subject line or something like that. So you can use these tools, but I really, really insist to push back on people that want to do it right, because it's free, kind of. So people, sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not, but for the most part it's free, so people overuse it. Frankly, I believe Tony Sertich is overusing it right now.
I'll tell.
Okay, please. And so people overuse it, and I think that you need to put a calendar on the wall and plot it out, and I think that technique could be really well used. Another thing about email is the only time we get spurts up in traffic to our website is when you send an email. You just don't, people don't by osmosis go, gee, I'm just going to go check this out and Google it and go there. A small percentage of people do, but really, to get people to go to a website, you got to go out and get them.
Can I just quickly note that you said that, and it's true, that it's a generational gap and that it's the elder generation that wants to use email? And just think 10 years ago, that would be a total joke, right? No one in that generation was using email then. So this may change rapidly.
Right.
Yeah.
My grandmother's the only I hear from my grandmother on Facebook more than 86. She's using Facebook on dial-up up in Pine City. and so I think part of it also is curiosity.
Yeah.
So my mother doesn't use this stuff very much, but my grandmother does. And so if you're trying to skip generations, look for the curious seniors and help them get tuned in as best you can, because they'll teach the rest of them.
I just taught Joan Grow how to text recently.
Yeah.
She has an iPhone.
She has an
I just
iPhone.
bought an iPhone. The old one, Emma. It's the 3. As my granddaughter said, that was all I needed.
Joan was our Secretary of State in Minnesota.
For 24 years, is that right?
I don't know, are we done now? Or is I passed out some paper, but I'm going to pass this around too. This is top secret stuff. Actually, it's on the web, but I've been involved in this space for 15 plus years. Our model is not so scalable in the sense that while 90% of what we do in our communities are run by local volunteers, that 10% cost is adding up now that we have 30 of these things. So we're stepping back and we're saying, what could we do to build a social enterprise that's still a nonprofit but generates enough revenue to support basically nearest neighbor networking online? So I'm looking for folks that are interested in getting involved in a project that will be sort of an open source nonprofit business, and it's called Neighborly. And so think electronic block clubs. So if this suits your fancy, if you find it interesting, drop me a note, because we have a pre-proposal in with the National Foundation, and maybe they'll actually ask for a full proposal. I brought it for you. Might be fun.
I just want to,
Probably don't
one
have
thing
quite
that was
enough.
said on the panel that I think is interesting was the whole thing about your Twitter profile and how you're branding yourself, especially if it's related to your business or your nonprofit and all of that. And I will say that as someone who recently has gone through a job search and was looking at a number of different places to work, I can tell you that I went out and I Googled everyone I was going to work with. I checked out their Facebook page. I checked out if they had a Twitter account, both in terms of knowing like what they're up to and what their interests are, but also to just kind of have that whatever. And when I was going through my job search with search firms, which some of you will do that and some of you will do that eventually, one of the questions is, do you have a Twitter account? Do you have a Facebook page? Can we search that? We want permission to search that. They probably could do that anyway, but they ask for permission. What will we find out there? Will it be embarrassing to you? And just to also make you aware, this does exist into perpetuity, and Twitter is being logged into the National Archives right now as we speak, everything we do. And so just being aware of that, I think, is a really important, both positive and be aware to what the downsides are of when you're out there tweeting away things that 10 years from now you're going to be like, oh my God, I did not want someone to see that. So.
One closing note by me too is just, I'm appalled at the demise of our media. Watching the 2009 city elections in Minneapolis was fascinating. We had the lowest turnout ever, and the Star Tribune covered it like it was the Golden Valley City Council. So what's the relationship there? Steve Brandt, they try to cover local politics, and they're basically not doing it anymore. And 15 years ago, there was a lot of talk about how local issues were going to be covered online, and I don't know if that promise has ever really been met. So how can people follow local issues? And we have to fill that void, because the knowledge that used to be provided by daily papers and things just isn't there. So we have to get information out.
Are you? Do we have one?
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
I can talk to.
Yeah,
I can ask
no.
that later. Well, I just wanted to follow up with something that you said earlier, Steve, but then also it leads into what you were saying about the demise of journalism. So if your goal with e-democracy or something like this is to connect neighbors, so Minneapolis in the Twin Cities area is the most segregated area in the country. So I live in a neighborhood for a whole bunch of different reasons, but mostly everybody around me kind of lives in the neighborhood for those kind of same reasons, mostly. There's an outlier. There's actually an Emmer sign, 2 blocks away, but that's it. That's it, literally. How would e-democracy address the fact that the Strib wasn't doing this either? But it's something that the Daily Planet has been trying to do, for instance, that model, which is get news from the Hmong community and the Somali community and these other communities that I don't live in, and most people in the suburbs barely even are aware of, but get them more in the mix. And the way that they're trying to do that is through their journalism. But then your point about journalism being so devastated in terms of a business model leaves us kind of, I think, in a precarious situation that this isn't going to necessarily address.
Some people say talk is cheap, and we say conversation is cost effective. And what I mean by that is that, while it's nice to have news, there's a situation where people need to do their own news or share their own messages. And with the Ford Foundation resources that we have for our inclusion campaign in Cedar Riverside and Frogtown, it's trying to address that. It's basically saying, why are just sort of white, not just white, but basically, why are middle class homeowner neighborhoods, why do they naturally use tools for local connections? And why are we allowing redlining of the neighborhoods that could benefit the most? So we've been doing a lot of outreach with the Somali community, the Oromo community, and aging white hippies. right, in Cedar Riverside. And in Frogtown, you have the mix of Hmong, African American, and white. And this is really difficult work, but it can be done, and we're showing how to sort of make it happen. And hardly anyone's doing it. So almost all of the local-to-local connections online, Daily Planet I think is commendable, but for the most part, all of it is sort of who shows up the easiest. And that's where all the commercial models are, and it's a real problem. So, I'm going to write down a web address where we have all kinds of blog posts, and we're starting to share lessons about how to do inclusion online and recruitment. So, and I think Facebook is part of the solution. The immigrant communities have basically said, we're not touching Star Tribune anymore, and anything public, even though we have real names, they basically said, we're tired of being attacked, we're tired of having to defend ourselves, but when they're with their friends and their celebrity musicians in their community, we've heard this from both the Hmong community and the Somali community, that's where it's happening. And so if you believe in some integration, a future Minnesota where people with different perspectives actually interact publicly, we're in trouble. And so hopefully we can address some of that over time.
Well, we are definitely over time, so thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I knew when I walk in already.